Hey, what's going on everyone? Jay's 2 cents here. You need to bear with me on this one here. I got a little bit of a ranting, sort of a, I don't know, monologue, if you will, open letter to the PC industry. And by industry, I'm talking about the manufacturers and all the AIBs and AICs and stuff. Because I'll be honest, I'm just getting a little tired of this stuff.
The Kraken series AIOs from NZXT come in many shapes and sizes to fit your CPU needs. The Kraken Elite series RGB coolers feature a 2.36-inch 640 by 640 customizable LCD screen, showing system info or custom images and GIFs for a custom look, F-series RGB fans, and a single breakout cable for simplified installation. If low-key is more your thing, the Kraken Elite series also comes in a black non-RGB edition while retaining the amazing pump screen. To see the full lineup of new Kraken Elite and non-Elite coolers from NZXT, follow the link in the description below.
All right, so there's a few things I want to talk about here because I'm gonna start off with saying I absolutely positively despise the term influencer. It's not, I'm gonna be honest, influencer is not something influencers name themselves. An influencer is a term that came about because of marketing agencies. Marketing agencies view anyone with a viewership or an audience watching as influencers. Like, hey, we can use them to influence buying decisions and stuff. Now that's sort of true on what a lot of us do. Like, I can't speak for everyone. I can say that other influencers I've talked to hate the term. And although we do try to have an impact on buying decisions, we try to make sure that we give people smart ones. Now, of course, I've made some mistakes in the past, and so have other influencers. We don't always get it right, but I can tell you right now, the purpose of buying decisions and influence has nothing to do with lining the pockets of the industry agencies and the marketing agencies and the brands themselves. It's about trying to determine whether or not something's worth the cost and give you guys information to make your own decisions on. So that's a term that it's just been completely bastardized over the duration that it's become a thing. I feel like the marketing agencies look at influencer, and really we could replace that term with manipulator, because that's honestly how they see it. So I just want to put that out there first of all, that I absolutely positively hate that term. So I'm gonna flip the script today, and I'm gonna use my influence to maybe keep you guys from making really, really bad decisions and seeing through the bullshit that a lot of these marketing agencies that represent a lot of these brands are trying to throw your way. They're trying to get you to drink the Kool-Aid. And you know, I did a little bit of research today on sort of pricing trends over the years, because the thing I'm noticing, and the reason why I'm making this video, is the audience is just so turned off right now at the idea of building a computer or upgrading their computer or getting into PC gaming. Rightfully so. Prices are out of control. Game quality is just, I wish that was in control, but it's not. The game quality is terrible. We've all been groomed to accept crappy products. We've been groomed to accept crappy launches of games. We've been groomed to just accept it is what it is and it will be fixed later. And what that does is it puts all of the control and all of the power in the hands of the manufacturer or the game developer. And in my opinion, that's wrong. That is not the way that this is supposed to be. It's like, if there's one thing the COVID shortages taught us, it's people became excited at the opportunity to buy something. Were you someone that signed up for a raffle or lottery raffle to be able to buy something? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt blessed for the opportunity to overpay for something? Well, that's where we've ended up. And I think the other thing I want to address here is a lot of these brands they understand we know our audience, and they'll ask me questions like, how do we get people interested in computers again? How do we get people interested? How do we get people interested? Well, I think a lot of the problems is many of these industry brands don't understand you created the disinterest. You did it. And now you're asking us to help you undo it. So let's go ahead and start with like motherboards. And I'm gonna start with motherboards because of the fact that motherboards are a serious indicator at where pricing has gone completely off the rails. Now, when I'm gonna show you some charts here coming up in a little bit, not for motherboard pricing, but for GPU pricing and CPU pricing and the trends over the last 12 years, going back to 2011. If you go back to 2011, 2012, 2013, and you talk about building a computer, a high-end motherboard, like a full-featured motherboard that does not leave a bunch of features missing or stripped off the board to keep it, you know, cheaper. Like it was a full feature, all the bells and whistles motherboard was like $250, maybe $300. Like a $300 motherboard back then was just like, wow, you spent a lot on a motherboard. Because you could get serious, well-performing, non-lower tiered chipset motherboards for 89 bucks, 99 bucks. $125 is where it started to look like, okay, we're paying a little more for a motherboard. 200 plus was like, wow, you're really going all out on a motherboard. You know, now if we look at motherboard pricing, it's kind of ridiculous. And let me explain. These brands, and I'm putting everyone in the same boat here. Like all of the brands are responsible for making this same mistake. And that is only marketing your flagship models. So what you start to do is you start to put a serious undertone in the industry of saying, this is what it costs. Now, that's not what it costs. That's the most you could spend is looking at buying some sort of an elite motherboard or a formula motherboard or whatever brand's top tier is gonna be. Yeah, you can spend $7, $8, $9, $1,000 on a motherboard. No problem. But the diminishing return on that and the amount of Kool-Aid you have to drink to really think that that is necessary is just, it's insane. Because today, in 2023, a $200 motherboard is like an entry point. Like $200, which used to be the high end, is now like, oh, now you're starting to get a couple of the features maybe that, have been stripped away from any board under that price point. It's ridiculous. So what I've got right here is a Newegg motherboards available in stock today at a max price of $150, which again, not that long ago was considered a solid mid to upper range motherboard, giving you all the feature sets that you would need. And you know what the sad part is on this? If we talk about anything current, like Intel's LGA 1700, you're not gonna get anything above a B660M. I mean, we're not even talking about when we were talking about like Z67, Z87 and all that, you were able to buy the overclocking top tier chipset for the $200 or below price point. But now we're talking B series motherboards, B660. Here's another B660M Asus Prime for 148 bucks. And the problem is, even when you look at like AMD stuff, and this is probably because of how it's more expensive right now to manufacture AM5 motherboards for AMD because they just switched to the LGA or the land grid array pin out, for the CPUs and no longer have it being on the CPU. It's on the motherboard now, the pins. There are only AM4 motherboards available for this price range of $150. And there are like B450s. There's another AMD A520 for A520 for $144. That is like the bottom spec period to get into AM4's latest chipset for AM4, not AM5 obviously, at A520 for $144. Ridiculous. An H510 LGA 1200 for $141. H510 has no overclocking, like there's no bells and whistles. You might have two fan headers. You probably have no RGB headers. You probably have one, maybe two M.2s. You might have three SATAs. There's not even a cooling solution on the VRM. Brands, this is why people are losing interest in computers, because you are literally pricing out the buyer. You were going after whales and whales only, and guess what? There's not enough whales in the world to keep your industry afloat when you price out the main buying demographic. Now, when we'll talk about inflation and stuff here, cost of materials is definitely more expensive, but it's not 50% more expensive for the cost of materials, depending on the material we're talking about here. But if we look at like graphics cards today, and this is where things really start to look gross. Right now I went onto Newegg, this is as we're filming this video, and I searched for graphics cards in stock under $300. We're looking at more 3060s, 4060, which we already know how terrible of a deal the 4060 is. 7600 black gaming for $269, 6650 XT for $249, 7600 8 gig for $269. So I took some time to go and really just research what was the cost, like what was the launch price of various graphics cards. And I charted it. So I charted it over from 2011 to 2023, what the launch price of particular graphics cards were. So if we look at this chart that I've created, and this is the scary part, you look at this chart, you're gonna see this massive spike, and that was 20 series, where that big old spike was. And then you'll see it get even higher, and that's the 30 series when they started the 90 and the 90 Ti and the 80 Ti for the 30 series. A lot of these prices shocked me at what they used to be, because I think we've been so groomed to accept higher prices as the norm until you go back and really look at what has been intentionally happening with pricing. And I'm using NVIDIA as the model here because, let's face it, we already know that AMD has been trailing NVIDIA, and AMD has also been, unfortunately, not innocent in following the NVIDIA pricing model of, hey, we can charge more. We'll charge less than NVIDIA, but we can charge way more than we have been. So unfortunately, AMD followed suit with that. But the GTX 680 was $549 at launch. And we'll talk about inflation in a minute, so hold up. Before you're even typing like, yeah, but inflation, it's gonna be eye-opening here. $549 US was the launch price of a 680. $649 for a 780. Now what you're gonna notice, up until 20 series, $549 to $649 is where stuff kind of traded. And what you'll notice is like, so $549 for the 680, $649 for the 780. That's a $100 improvement. Then the 780 Ti was $699. However, the 980, which was arguably faster than a 780 Ti, not by a lot, but it was faster, was $549. $150 cheaper than the outgoing 780 Ti. So the 980 Ti came in at $649, which is $50 cheaper still than the launch price of the 780 Ti. So this was like the golden era of graphics cards. Like the 700 series and the 900 series, these were really powerful, although the 700 series was hot, but these were really powerful graphics cards that kept price parity with each other. You know, they just sort of slotted the old stuff, the new stuff within the old stuff, and gave you more for the same price, or less in this instance. The 1080, the Pascal, which was arguably the most golden era of graphics cards, period. The 1080 launched at a price of $599 in 2016. $599. The 1080 was such a performance leap beyond the 980 Ti, and it was $50 cheaper. Now this is where things started to really go off the rails though, because that was when NVIDIA introduced the Founders Edition pricing, where Founders Edition card was a $100 price premium above the MSRP of the card, because NVIDIA got into the business of selling cards direct to consumer, bypassing the AIBs or the AICs. Add-in board or add-in card, they're the two acronyms that are always used if you're wondering why we switch back and forth. But bypassing their own partners and selling direct at a $100 price premium. So the $599 price point did exist with some very basic, like blower style coolers, plastic shrouds, just super basic cards, because none of the AIBs believed their designs were MSRP or reference worthy. They were all custom, so they followed the pricing of $699 or up. So that was where this artificial paper price sort of kind of existed, but realistically it was $799, not $699, not $799. 1080 Ti came out, $699. That was later that year, the same year, $699 with a founder's price of $100, so additional, so $799. 20 series, you guys all know how that went. 20 series, when RTX and RT cores and Tensor cores and DLSS and all that launched, NVIDIA wanted an absolute premium for it. We're talking $700 or $699 for a 2080. Now that was reference MSRP price, $100 more for the founders, or the 2080 Ti at $999 with a $200 Founders Edition price. Ironically, if you guys remember, that Founders Edition cooler, that NVIDIA's first time doing an axial fan instead of a blower style, was absolutely terrible. Some of the worst airflow ever in an axial cooler. It performed horribly in terms of temps. A $200 price premium on the Founder. So what did that do? That meant everyone else was gonna follow suit at that $1199 or higher. That's where the first big spike was on the chart. Well, 30 series came around, $699 for the 3080. That's why the 3080 was supposed to be like amazing. That's where Ampere was supposed to be like absolutely fixing the market. The only people who got 3080s for $699 was the very first round of buyers before they were out of stock, and then scalping and everything went completely off the rails and people were paying up to $2,500 for a 3080. Moving on, they also launched the 3090 at the same time. Now this is the first time we saw a 90 series graphics card designed to be an actual mainstream gaming card, although they tried to market this very much as a poor man's productivity card. It replaced the Titan. You notice there was no Titan cards in here. It replaced the Titan as being part of the GeForce lineup, a true gaming card. As much as they argued with me that the 90 series wasn't for gaming and the Titans weren't for gaming, they absolutely marketed them as such. $1,500 for the 3090. And then don't forget, the 3080 Ti at $1,200, price parity with the 2080 Ti. Oh, look how much more you're getting for the same price, but the grooming, right? To accept higher prices. $649 starts to look like a really good deal, right? And for the previous generation 80 Ti cards, the 3090 Ti, $2,000 price point. $2,000. And you know why? Because at that point, they had already seen the evidence that there was enough people out there willing to pay ridiculously 3x markups on graphic cards that they went, well, let's just launch one at $2,000 and see what happens. Well, guess what? That was when people started to notice, like, this is absolutely ridiculous. They are now wringing out the industry for every dollar that they can, which now, more than a year and a half later, you're really starting to see the effects of the just dishonesty, the intent to overprice, and people are pushing back now. 40 series came along. 4080 launched at $1,200, 4090 launched at $1,600. And here's the problem. If you look at the chart, yeah, sure, it was a price reduction. Technically, even though there's no 4080 Ti, you know NVIDIA was planning a 4080 Ti, but I think they've held off on that because of the fact that there's so much pushback and availability right now that clearly launching more SKUs is probably not a smart move. I believe there was even a 4090 Ti that was rumored that and quote unquote scrapped. A 3090 at $1,500 and a 4090 at $1,600. Oh, it's only $100 more, but look how much faster it is. Realistically, it was compared to the 3090 Ti at $2,000, so it looks like $400 cheaper for way more performance. Looking at the chart, you can see now that drop back down of pricing is not in reality at all. Well, what happens when you talk about inflation? Here is how the prices look adjusted for inflation. Now, adjusting for inflation in today's dollars for back then is obviously going to look very skewed because of the fact that 10 year ago dollars was 10 year ago dollars. It was not affected by today's inflation. So if you were to, take a look at the pricing for current inflation, you can see things were up a couple $100, a couple $100. Clearly accounting for inflation for 12 years ago at a couple $100 is still far below the pacing of where current pricing is at today's dollars. Let's talk about 70 series for a second here, because 70 series is where most people don't shop 80 Ti or 90 cards. 70 series is where most people started to consider like, hey, this is a high-end card, it can do everything I want it to do, and it's cheaper. So 1070, this is what blew my mind. The Pascal 1070 was a very, very solid card. The 970, that was when NVIDIA really screwed up, and that was with the whole 4 gigs, was actually 3.5 gigs, and it was poorly marketed. And 1070, I even asked the team, I was like, how much do you guys think the 1070 was when it launched? People were like, I don't know, $499, $500? It was $380. How much is a 4070 today? $700. So, you talk about grooming, right? The 2070 was actually $499. So that's $120 up from the 1070, and that was MSRP. You add Founders, that's another $100. That's now $220 markup from one gen to the next. CPUs actually are not as bad as I expected them to be. From the 2700K, which was the Intel gaming i5, no, actually it was i7 because it was second gen. i7, that's what 2700 was, and then the 2500K was the 4-core. 2700K was $340 in 2011. And the 70K, or like they call it either 70 or 770K, whatever, stayed around that price point, $350 for, from second gen to ninth gen. That's actually not bad. That's, of course, Intel wasn't really expanding the core counts and stuff very much. They clearly were behind AMD during all of that, so they had to stay price competitive. But 2700K was $340, 3770 was $342, 4770 was $350, 6700K was $350, 7700K was $339, 8700K was $359, 9700K was $374, but that's also where they introduced the i9 lineup for the mainstream CPUs. And then anything i9 was usually $100 to $150 more. So 9900K was $488, 10900K was $600, 11900K was $539, 12900K was $650, and that's where they really tried to really push the price, but they had to reduce it prior to 13th gen, and 13th gen came like only months after 12th gen. They reduced the price down to like $549, and then 12th gen right now, 13900K is $589. But you look at the chart, it actually stays pretty level. And the only time you see these spikes now on the chart, that was when the i9s were added. So it's actually not that bad on CPU. I mean, if you stay with the 700K models, like the 11700K was $399, so we are talking about a $50 bump 10 years later, which isn't that bad. You account for inflation, and we put the inflation numbers up on here. You can see that it jumped up across the board, but then it gets very close together as we get towards today's pricing, which shows that it's still, accounting for inflation, was actually pretty level. The pricing wasn't as bad as I expected it to be with inflation accounted. It's just as core count went up, so did cost. I have some advice for both the industry, and I have some advice for the buyer. First of all, the industry needs to stop hyperbolizing on top tier product. There is not enough marketing around affordability. There is not enough marketing around entry-level price points, quality at entry-level price points, getting people into the genre. There's so many people out there that I have seen in our videos over the last year say, screw it, I'm just getting a PS5, or screw it, I'm just getting a console, or I'm getting even a handheld these days. If you'd stop only, because the problem is all these brands are competing for the top dog position. It's like bragging about how expensive you are. But if you want consumer trust and you want consumers to believe in your product and that they can afford the product, advertise your affordable products. You'd be surprised how many consumers don't go out there and do research on lower end products or lower end tiers. They see the ads and they see the product that gets sent to influencers, and they always want to send their best products. And we've pushed back a lot saying, stop sending us your super expensive motherboards. Send us your mid tier, send us your entry level, send us your realistic products. We've said this for years, but they want to look great against the competitor. I can tell you right now, you spend $800 on a motherboard, you've overpaid by about $500 on things you will look nice in a case, and guess what? Once it's in there and it's on and you're doing your thing, you're not gonna look at it that much. And it's not gonna even grow with you because manufacturers, especially Intel, doesn't give you more than maybe 2 generations worth of compatibility. So you're buying a new motherboard anyway if you upgrade the system in more than 1 generation's past. AMD's giving you some more core support in terms of the socket being relevant, all of AM4, and then AM5 is going to do the same thing. But now there's rumors that AM5 may not even last past next year. Because as you add pins, you have to change the socket. And now that they're LGA, they're going to fall in the same trap Intel pulled. You remember 1150 versus 1151? 1 pin change, forcing an entire motherboard socket change? This stuff's on purpose. I have a little bit of advice for NVIDIA. Break GeForce off into its own company. Get GeForce out from under Jensen. Jensen's true passion right now is AI. And that is not gaming graphics cards. Sure, the technology trickles down to mainstream consumerism. But the way the company is being run, I think there is so much distrust amongst the brand and the consumer right now that one of the only ways, and I'm sure sales figures don't support what I'm saying, but I'm telling you right now in terms of long-term brand trust, because you guys may not want to admit this, but NVIDIA is on very rocky ground with the consumer. They make a great product, but it's overpriced, and it's just, they followed the Apple moniker too much of, you don't know what we want or what you want, we know what you want, we'll tell you what you want, and you're gonna pay for it. That's exactly how NVIDIA operates, and it's disgusting. Break GeForce off into its own company. Let it have true gamer leadership, buy a gaming staff that understands how to run a gaming business, and let true innovation, let affordability, and let passion really show. Because I think if you ask just about any consumer today, is NVIDIA passionate for gamers? Even though NVIDIA tries to put that in all their marketing, I bet you would hear a resounding no from anyone that you ask. That's because it's so obvious that NVIDIA is more interested in selling 700% marked up 100 series AI generating GPUs at $70,000 a pop than giving two shits about the gaming industry. And I feel like GeForce needs to be its own brand. You know how AMD absorbed Radeon and bought Radeon and absorbed it into AMD? I feel like it needs to be the opposite for both these brands. I feel like Radeon should be its own brand. Again, like how when it used to be ATI Technologies. And GeForce needs to be its own brand. Let it be under the umbrella of NVIDIA so it has NVIDIA money, but let it operate in a true gaming passionate capacity. Last but not least, the consumer. The consumer is not innocent in all of this. There are deals out there. There are ways to spend anywhere between $800 to $1,200 on a PC and absolutely decimate anything you could have gotten for $1,200 10 years ago, obviously. So you are getting more performance per dollar, even at the low-end product tier lineup, than you could ever get in the past. Moore's Law is still very much in effect, and we have very fast, very good components that exist in a very affordable price points. But you've let the marketing get to you to the point to where you don't believe it's affordable. Now, yes, inflation obviously has affected more than just this stuff. And if you find yourself in a position where you're like, I clearly can't buy a PC because I've got rent to pay, yeah, that's obviously priorities are priorities for a reason. But if you're just jaded and you're tired of hearing the marketing and all that, and you're just sort of like out of spite saying screw it, I think you owe it to yourself to at least do a double take and make sure that you truly can't afford it, because there are affordable options. There is stuff with price parity and where we're used to seeing it. It's just, you gotta ignore all of the bullshit marketing you're gonna see and don't drink any of these brands' Kool-Aid. I'm passionate about this. And when I read the comments and I empathize entirely with what people are going through and saying at pricing, because I want nothing more than everyone to share. Like I have a few major passions in my life: cars, computers and tech, and my family. I'm not sharing my family with you guys, and I'm not sharing my cars with you guys. But computers, I want everyone to be involved in this. The computers I can't tell you how many people have written me saying they were in dark places in their life and they found passions in computers and building them and tinkering with them and overclocking them and playing games. And it may sound so cliche, but it literally changes their lives. And you may be missing out on that if you're not even giving it a chance because of all the bullshit that has been created in the industry by the brands themselves. That's why I say, the brands created this mess and now they're sitting there scratching their head going, what happened? Anyway, that's it guys. I just wanted to get that off my chest. I'll feel better for a couple of weeks and then I'll probably make the same video again next year or something. All right guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.